You are a nurse. Stop telling me what to do. Stay in your lane.
But doctor, I was just trying to help.
The heart of soul, Dr. Lucas Grant, a well-known surgeon, makes an unforgivable mistake. He slaps a nurse in front of a crowded hospital. Moments later, he learns she is no ordinary nurse. She is the wife of Park Jae-won, a ruthless 35-year-old Korean billionaire with a dangerous reputation. Jae-won is a mafia boss with a haunting tattoo on his neck that speaks of a past he's desperately trying to bury. As the story unravels, Lucas finds himself entangled in a web of betrayal, revenge, and passion, leading to a dark path he never expected. Will love be the price he pays, or will vengeance take everything from him? Before we dive in, please like and subscribe. Your support gives me the strength to keep creating these stories for you. To my beloved readers in the United States and every corner of the world, I love you all deeply. Thank you for being here. Dr. Lucas Grant sat in his office, trying to focus on the mountain of paperwork that was piling up, but his mind kept drifting. He was a man who had always been in control, a renowned surgeon at one of Seoul's top hospitals, with a career that was just beginning to reach its peak. But something was weighing heavily on him today, a vague sense of unease, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. It wasn't until the incident with nurse Amara that the real trouble began. Amara, 25 years old, had only been working at the hospital for a few months. A stunning woman with dark skin, sharp features, and an intensity in her eyes that made her stand out even in the busy corridors of the hospital. She wasn't the type to let things slide, which was exactly what Lucas needed when he was running late for his surgeries. But that day, something broke. He had been rushing to a meeting with the board when Amara had, in her usual no-nonsense manner, told him he had left his file on the desk in the wrong place. He'd been in a hurry and snapped at her in a way that shocked even him. "Don't tell me what to do, nurse," he had shouted, his frustration getting the better of him. Amara had looked at him in disbelief, but instead of backing down, she stood tall. "Dr. Grant, you're crossing a line," she said firmly. The room had been thick with tension, but what happened next was something neither of them expected. Lucas had slapped her, a hard, unexpected slap that rang through the hospital lobby, the sound of it echoing in the sterile silence. The shock on her face was mirrored by the gasps from the nearby staff, who had frozen in place, unsure of what to do. Amara didn't cry out or retaliate. Instead, she simply turned on her heel, her face pale but her jaw set with quiet resolve. She walked away, leaving Lucas standing there, his heart racing in confusion. Minutes later, Lucas's phone rang. He answered without checking the number, distracted by the events unfolding in his head. "Dr. Grant," the voice on the other end was calm but cold, a voice that sent a chill down his spine. "You've made a grave mistake." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. The voice continued, its tone now carrying a dangerous edge. "The woman you just slapped, that's my wife." Lucas froze. Park Jae-won. The name came to him in a flash, an infamous billionaire businessman known for his ruthlessness and cold demeanor. He had built an empire, but there were whispers about his connections to the criminal underworld. His presence in the city was like a shadow, unseen, but always looming. The image of the man's neck flashed in Lucas's mind, his massive tattoo that was said to mark him as a mafia boss. The symbol was a constant reminder of the past he couldn't escape, a past full of blood and power. "Do you know who I am, Dr. Grant?" Jae-won's voice cut through the air, his words more like a command than a question. I suggest you stay out of my way," Jae-won interrupted. "You're not the first man to make this mistake, and you won't be the last. But if you want to keep your life in one piece, I recommend you fix this immediately." The line went dead. Lucas's mind was racing as the weight of the situation settled in. He had slapped a woman who was married to one of the most powerful men in Korea, a man whose empire spanned from business to the dark underworld. And now, Lucas had made himself a target. He knew he couldn't hide from this. Not anymore. The consequences would be severe. But something about Amara's gaze, the way she had held herself after the slap, lingered in his mind. There was a fire in her that he couldn't ignore. Despite everything that had happened, he felt drawn to her. There was a story behind her eyes, something that spoke of strength, resilience, and perhaps even revenge. The next morning, Lucas found himself standing in front of a lavish penthouse suite in downtown Seoul. It was the address Yi-won's call had given him. He had no choice but to make amends and face the man who owned the city, both its legal and illegal territories. The door opened before he had a chance to knock, revealing Amara standing there, her eyes cold but unreadable. "Dr. Grant," she said, her voice soft yet biting. "You came." Lucas opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he stepped inside the apartment, his heart pounding. He could hear the faint hum of classical music in the background, Yi-won's favorite, a detail he had learned from his research. And then, standing in the shadows of the living room, was Yi-won himself. His eyes were sharp, predatory. The tattoo on his neck stood out starkly against his dark suit, a symbol of his power, of the life he led outside the law. He was a man who commanded respect and fear. "Well," Yi-won said, breaking the silence, "you've come to apologize. I wonder, Dr. Grant, do you know what it's like to lose control, to make a mistake you can never take back?" Lucas nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." Amara stepped forward, cutting him off. "You didn't mean to. Do you know what you've done to my life, to our lives?" The tension in the room was palpable, and Lucas realized that the woman standing before him wasn't just a nurse anymore. She wasn't just a victim of a slap. She was the key to something far more dangerous. Yi-won's gaze never left Lucas as he spoke, his voice low but carrying the weight of 1,000 threats. "I think it's time you learn what happens when you cross the line, Doctor." The tension in the room was suffocating, each second stretching into an eternity. Lucas stood frozen, his mind spinning in circles, trying to make sense of the chaotic situation he had walked into. There was something about the way Yi-won stood, composed, unbothered, yet somehow terrifying, that made Lucas feel smaller than he had ever felt in his life. The tattoo on Yi-won's neck seemed to pulse with an ominous energy, almost as if it were a living, breathing thing. It was a symbol of a past Lucas couldn't begin to understand, but the sense of danger it exuded was undeniable. Amara, however, was a different story. Her calm facade was gone. The fiery determination from earlier had returned, and her eyes, dark, stormy, and filled with a quiet fury, locked onto Lucas as if he were the cause of all her problems. She wasn't the timid nurse he had encountered earlier. This woman was a force to be reckoned with. She had the power to make or break him. Yi-won motioned for Lucas to sit down in the leather chair across from him, his movements slow and deliberate. The look in his eyes said that there was no escaping what was about to happen. Not that Lucas had any intention of leaving. Not now, not after everything that had unfolded. Lucas hesitated, but with a sharp look from Yi-won, he took a seat. Amara, however, remained standing, arms crossed, watching him with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. "Do you know who I am, Dr. Grant?" Yi-won repeated, his voice smooth, but the coldness in it sent a shiver down Lucas's spine. Lucas nodded, swallowing hard. "You're Park Jae-won, the boss of the KJ group." Yi-won smirked, leaning forward slightly. "More than that, I am the man who owns this city, its businesses, its underworld, its politics. I don't just play the game, I run it. And anyone who crosses me, well, they don't get to walk away. Not easily, anyway." There was a weight in his words that seemed to hang in the air, thick and suffocating. Lucas could feel his heart racing. "I made a mistake," Lucas said, his voice hoarse, struggling to keep his composure. "I shouldn't have slapped your wife. I was out of line." Amara's eyes flickered at the mention of the word wife, but she said nothing. Yi-won, however, didn't seem fazed by Lucas's apology. Instead, his gaze shifted to Amara, who was standing motionless, her face a mask of restraint. "You think an apology is enough?" Yi-won asked, his eyes narrowing. "You think words can fix what you've done to her?" Lucas opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Amara cut him off. "I don't want his apology. He doesn't get to fix this with a few words." Yi-won's lips twitched as if he were amused by the situation. He turned to Amara, his tone changing, softening even if only slightly. Amara, darling, we both know that he's not the one who needs to make things right. He paused, turning back to Lucas. You're not here to apologize. You're here because you've done something you can't undo. You've stepped into a world you know nothing about. And now, you're going to learn what happens when you don't respect the boundaries of the powerful. Lucas's stomach tightened. He hadn't expected this kind of response. He had assumed that a simple apology, maybe a gesture of goodwill, could smooth things over. But now he understood. This wasn't just about a slap. This was about power, respect, and control. What do you want from me? Lucas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jae-won leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers in front of his face, his eyes never leaving Lucas. The silence stretched out before he finally spoke. I want you to feel what it's like to be helpless, to understand what it means to have no control over your own life. You'll work for me, Dr. Grant. You'll pay for the disrespect you've shown my wife. But more importantly, I want you to learn that there are consequences for every action. You've crossed a line, and now you'll face the price. Amara stepped forward, her eyes locking with Lucas's. Don't think this is just some kind of punishment. You've done something unforgivable, and the only way to make amends is by serving us, for as long as we deem necessary. Do you understand? Lucas's heart was pounding in his chest. What had he gotten himself into? The weight of Amara's words hung heavy in the air. He had no idea what kind of hell he had just stepped into, but one thing was clear. His life was no longer his own. He nodded slowly. I understand. Jae-won smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was the smile of a man who had just made a deal that would seal Lucas's fate. Good, Jae-won said. You'll start by taking care of my wife's business, everything she needs, every task she gives you, no matter how small. But remember, Dr. Grant, you're not here because we feel sorry for you. You're here because you're going to prove yourself. You're going to show that you're worthy of stepping into this world. He stood up, his towering figure casting a shadow over Lucas. And if you fail, there will be consequences. Lucas felt the weight of those words, the finality of them. He had no choice but to comply. There was no escape from this world, not now. The price for his mistake was steep, and it had only just begun. As Lucas left Jae-won's penthouse that night, the world outside seemed different. His steps were slow, heavy with the realization that he had just entered a dangerous game, one he couldn't back out of. He could feel eyes watching him, as if the city itself was waiting to see how he would play his part. But in the back of his mind, there was another thought that lingered, something he couldn't shake. Despite the power and fear that surrounded Jae-won, despite the danger in his life now, Lucas couldn't deny the strange pull he felt toward Amara. She was more than just a victim of circumstance. She was powerful in her own right, and as much as he tried to ignore it, there was something about her, a fire, an intensity, that intrigued him. But he knew better than to cross that line again. There were more important things at stake now: his life, his career, and the dangerous man who had just claimed him as his own. The next few days passed in a blur of tension, fear, and uncertainty. Lucas tried to keep his head down, obeying the orders he was given without question. Every time he saw Amara, his heart raced, though he couldn't figure out why. She was always cold, calculating, and distant, yet there was something in her eyes, a depth, a complexity, that made Lucas feel as if he were standing on the edge of a cliff and he couldn't look away. But the deeper he got into this world, the more he realized how little control he had. Jae-won's empire was vast, and Lucas was nothing but a pawn. He had been reduced to an errand boy, sent to do whatever tasks were asked of him. It started with small things: picking up documents from a secluded office, meeting shady individuals at the edges of town, and delivering messages that made him question his own morality. But slowly, the tasks became more demanding, more dangerous. One afternoon, as Lucas stood outside a luxury hotel in downtown Seoul, waiting for a delivery from a trusted associate of Jae-won, he saw Amara once again. She walked past him without a glance, her head held high, her steps purposeful. But Lucas couldn't help himself. He watched her as he always did. She seemed so composed, so in control, yet there was an unspoken sorrow that clung to her every move. Her life had been shaped by this world, just as his was now being shaped by it. Are you following me, Dr. Grant? Amara's voice cut through his thoughts, and Luca's stiffened. She had turned around, her gaze sharp and piercing. He quickly shook his head, trying to regain his composure. "I wasn't," he started, but she raised a hand, silencing him. "You're too eager to please him," she said, her voice tinged with a touch of bitterness. "Don't think for a second that you'll be rewarded for your servitude. Yi-won doesn't care about you. You're just a tool, a means to an end." Lucas wanted to argue, but the words died in his throat. She was right in so many ways. Yi-won wasn't a man who made friends. He didn't care about people. He cared about power, control, and revenge. And Lucas, for all his medical skill and reputation, was nothing more than a stepping stone in Yi-won's grand design. Amara's gaze softened slightly, and for a brief moment, Lucas saw a different side of her, vulnerable, maybe even lost. But the moment passed as quickly as it had come. "I'm not your enemy, Amara," Lucas said quietly, his voice filled with an emotion he hadn't expected to feel. He wasn't sure what drove him to say it, whether it was guilt for what had happened between them or an inexplicable desire to understand her. She hesitated before speaking again, her tone quieter. "You don't understand. This life, it's suffocating. Every day I have to bury a piece of myself just to survive, and now you're part of it, whether you like it or not." Lucas watched her walk away, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. He had thought he was simply trying to make amends, but now he understood that there was no easy way out of this. There was no redemption, not for him, not for her. A week passed before Lucas found himself summoned back to Yi-won's penthouse. He had completed every task assigned to him, running errands, making deliveries, and standing by as Yi-won orchestrated his ruthless plans. But something felt different this time, as if the game had changed again. When he arrived at the penthouse, Yi-won wasn't there. Amara was alone, standing by the window, looking out over the glittering city below. The coldness in her eyes had softened just a fraction, and she seemed less like the powerful woman who had given him orders, and more like a person who was just as trapped as he was. Amara didn't turn when he entered the room. Instead, she spoke, her voice distant. "Do you ever wonder how we got here?" Lucas hesitated before answering. "You mean how I ended up working for your husband?" "No," she replied softly. "I mean how we ended up in this world, this life, where everything we do is dictated by someone else, where we have no choice but to follow orders." Lucas felt the weight of her words pressing against him. It was a question he had asked himself countless times over the past few days. How had his life come to this? How had a simple mistake, an angry outburst, spiraled into a situation where he was now working for a dangerous billionaire, entangled in a world he had no business being a part of? "I don't know," he said quietly, "but I can't change it now." Amara turned to face him, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that left him breathless. For a moment, neither of them spoke, but the air between them was thick with something unspoken. There was a tension there, something fragile yet powerful. "What if you could change it?" Amara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas frowned, unsure of what she meant. "What do you mean?" She stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "What if I could help you? What if I could get you out of this mess? But only if you're willing to make a choice, a real choice." He stared at her, confused. "What are you asking me to do?" Amara's lips curled into a smile, almost a sad smile. "I'm asking you to choose. Choose to walk away from this life. Choose to stop being a pawn in Yi-won's game. Choose to take control of your own fate." Lucas's mind raced as he processed her words. It was the offer of a lifetime, the chance to escape everything, escape the darkness that had slowly seeped into his life. But there was a catch. There was always a catch. "And if I refuse?" Lucas asked, his voice low, his heart pounding in his chest. "If you refuse," Amara's smile faded, her expression hardening, "then you'll be just like everyone else, a puppet, a tool, and when Yi-won is done with you, you'll be discarded without a second thought." It was a chilling thought, but one that seemed all too real. Lucas realized then that he was standing at a crossroads. There was no going back now, no way to undo the mistakes he had made. But there was a chance, a slim one. He could take the offer, walk away, break free. Or he could stay, play the game, and live with the consequences. The decision would change everything.